Welcome into the All Things Mizzou podcast presented by Missouri Tigers on SI. Today is part 2 of our breakdown of Mizzou's roster heading into the transfer portal season here. Since we recorded our last episode here, Mizzou has had 2 big announcements come through. One, that Mekhi Miller, wide receiver junior, is going to be entering the transfer portal. He only had 3 receptions in this season, and he's just in a crowded wide receiver room, so can't really blame him there. And then Armand Mimbu, as we discussed in our last episode, is officially declaring for the NFL draft. So just as we said in that last episode, nothing really changing with Mimbu's deciding to. That was kind of what we were assuming. And they're still going to have to add multiple pieces along that offensive line with losing 3 starters and probably shuffling a few guys around with Caden Green. And, they're losing 2 great depth pieces too, and Drake Heismeyer and Mitch Walters, I believe, is out of eligibility too. So have some work to do there. We're switching things over to the defensive side of the ball. I'm Joey Vance, and I'm joined by Michael Stamps here to break this down. And let's just head right into it with the edge position for Mizzou. An interesting group that Eli Drinkwitz mentioned on his National Signing Day press conference on Wednesday of the depth that they have there. They obviously get Javion Hilson in the final hour of signings, and then Dayton Hopkins as well, a member of this class. They're losing quite a bit of talent in Joe Moore, Johnny Walker Jr., but they are retaining Jalen Brown, Eddie Kelly Jr., Ja'Kai Lane, Williams Nwaneri, Darius Smith, and Zion Young. Remember Darius Smith, the Georgia transfer that had a season-ending leg injury, so never saw him take the field. And then I mentioned the 2 freshmen they're adding. It feels like this is a year where you rely on Zion Young and Darius Smith feel like are going to be the main guys. Darius Smith is more of a little bit of a hybrid with the inside linebacker, was going to play that joker role in Corey Batoon's defense. So I definitely think, we saw very little of Williams Nwaneri this year. I definitely think this would be his year, if not now, then never, for Williams in Mizzou. And Eli Drinkwitz continuously mentioned his name on Wednesday again as a guy that's going to take over in that room this year. So definitely some losses. It kind of feels a little bit like a few of the positions we talked on offense, though, of if they see a guy that they really like in the portal, they'll add, but more than likely, maybe just a depth piece. I mean, they went pretty heavy on edge last year in the transfer portal. I mean, Michael, welcome you into the show. What are you thinking at Mizzou's edge position here?
I have questions on if they really need to add anything. I mean, I think we saw some jumps from guys last year from the season before to this season, and there were some improvements there. Eddie Kelly showed us a lot this season, had a pretty good stretch of games on the last part of the season. So that's a guy that could probably see an increased role. And I don't think fully understand or fully know what Darius Smith is capable of yet. So going to be a fun one to see how he contributes. All I remember of him is he is just an insanely, he's a freak of an athlete, which seems to be a common trend with some of the guys on this team. But yeah, I mean, Nwaneri, Jalen Brown is a guy that probably hasn't gotten discussed at all, but another very talented 4-star, talent there. Ja'Kai Lang is talented, and he had some flashes of potential. So, I mean, adding another guy for the sake of experience probably couldn't hurt, but Zion Young, like you mentioned, is probably going to be the leader there, and I would like to think he had a breakout season this year with Missouri. So I only see him getting better, and then a combination of Darius Smith, Eddie Kelly, and then Williams Nwaneri, I would imagine would be the next guy up if they don't bring anyone else in. I don't think they need to bring anyone else in. An experienced depth guy, like you mentioned. Similar to the production level of a guy like Eddie Kelly or like a Joe Moore, probably couldn't hurt just for the sake of experience, but it's a very talented room and seems like a position they're probably set on for the near future with the amount of young guys they have there.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about that, I mean, what do you see in Hilson? Like I said, was one of the latest or the very last addition to that group that signed on Wednesday after flipping his commitment from Florida State.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I say this every time we talk about a prospect, and there seems to be a common trend of high levels of athleticism, long arms, pretty smart player, I'd like to say too, and he has a pretty good package of moves to get to the quarterback, which is not something you always see. I think in high school when it comes to edge rushers uh, and pass rushers and that sort of thing, you see a lot of guys that just rely on pure athleticism because they can do that. You can do that in high school. Not everyone is going to be an SC offensive tackle, but he hasn't. He's crafty and has a nice set of moves that I think will translate over. And he's a good tackler as well. 6'4", 235 pounds. That's pretty, pretty solid, especially when you look at a guy like Dayton Hopkins, who is 24/7. This is him as 6'6", 210. Our last episode we talked about Dakota Terrell, who's around similar build at the tight end spot, probably needing to fill out a little bit and add a couple pounds on. I would imagine Dayton Hopkins has to do the same because I don't know if 210 pounds is sustainable at the position there. But yeah, Hilson, very talented, physical, good tackler. Definitely has some high pass rush potential. There's no telling if or when he's going to see the field this year. It really is going to depend on who they bring. If they bring anyone else in, another veteran, definitely could work his way up the depth chart a little bit. And in general, not just about Hilson, but with this group in general, I mentioned high potential, that sort of thing. But this might be the most fun position on the defense. I mean, Winery, Jalen Brown, Darius Smith is electric. Zion Young is electric and a huge playmaker. And then you add guys like Hilson and Hopkins. And I mentioned that we haven't even – no, you mentioned it actually. We haven't even truly seen, what Williams Neri could do yet. He, played sparingly and had some good moments, but just didn't really get the chance to prove himself. Same thing with Jalen Brown. I don't know how many snaps he played this year. I would like to say it was very, 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 very small. So we don't even know what he's completely capable of yet too. So two guys there that are probably going to be looking to prove themselves a little bit. And just in general, it's a lot of fun, very athletic defensive ends and edge rushers that, have a high potential. And there's going to be some young guys probably that need to play right away.
Moving on to defensive tackle, one of the strongest groups on this team this past season, and they're only losing Christian Williams. You're retaining Justin Bodford, Marquise Cruciel, Chris McClellan, Jalen Marshall, Sterling Webb, Elias Williams, Sam Williams, and then adding in Jason Dow from Althoff High School. Jason Dow, a great wrestler, I can tell you that. And like I said, I mean, Marquise Cruciel and Jalen Marshall were two of the emerging names of this season. You especially saw Marquise Cruciel continue to get more opportunities week by week. Here, I'd be shocked if they spend money here, especially you keep a leader in that group. And Chris McClellan, I don't necessarily mean by a leadership in the like motivational type way. I have no idea what Chris McClellan provides there, but an alpha in that group, if you will. And then so many names in there that are just have a lot of potential. So I think they are set there for right now and have quite a bit of depth. Anything to add there, Michael?
No, there's no reason to add anybody. And, it's a group that's on the younger side. I mean, I guess Webb's going to be senior, and so will McClellan. I don't know exactly what year Marshall and Sam Williams are, but I know Elias Williams is going to be a freshman in Bodford too. I believe they both redshirted. So good mix of experience and youthfulness, and like you said, talented. I don't know who kind of presents as the number 2 guy next to Chris McClellan or behind Chris McClellan. Maybe it's Graciel, maybe it's Sterling Webb, maybe it's Jalen Marshall. That'll be kind of an interesting decision to make there. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that needs to be done at the defensive tackle spot. They have a good mix of experience, and it's a lot of, they all know the system, and what's going to be expected of them from Corpatu and Eli Drinkwitz, which is another positive that you're not going to have to, really teach anything outside of Jason Dowell, who is not going to more than likely have to worry about playing right away.
Right. I mean, the rotation at defensive tackle this year was some point 6 or 7 deep, and they can really just continue to do that in this upcoming season if everything goes to plan for them. Moving on to linebackers, losing weak side linebacker Tristan Newsom, and then Chuck Hicks and Corey Flagg as well. And Corey Flagg really, and Nick Rodriguez even really took over for Chuck Hicks down the line this season. Corey Flagg is definitely a big loss. Tristan Newsom as well, losing a lot of athleticism there. But kind of the same that went for a defensive tackle. A lot of exciting potential here. Maybe not as proven as they are at defensive tackle, but you have Jeremiah Beasley, the one who was formerly committed to Michigan last year and then transferred over to Missouri. In the spring, Brian Huff, Brayshawn Littlejohn, Cleo Jacobs, Nicholas Rodriguez, like I said, got some playing time this year. And then adding Jason Keene, Missouri product, and Dante McClellan as well, two just very athletic players, like you've been harping on, Michael. This group is an interesting one. I don't really know who the real leader in this group is. Missouri, going back now for a few years, has had a pretty strong inside linebacker room with Chad Bailey, Tyron Hopper, and then the group this year. I really like what I see out of Khalil Jacobs, Nicholas Rodriguez as well for potential wise, and Jacobs is definitely more of a specialty player, I would say, as really talented blitzer, kind of comp to Tristan Newsom. So interesting group here. I like. There's definitely promise and potential at a lot of different spots, but I don't know exactly where everyone lines up. I mean, Brian Huff has been in the program for a little bit now. Brayshawn Littlejohn entering, I believe, his redshirt sophomore year. So be interesting to see what this group looks like. Any thoughts there, Michael?
Yeah, it seems like a situation where you do what you did last year and you go bring in a experienced Power 5 veteran at the spot and let them take command. I think the decision they make is ultimately going to come down to if they think Nicholas Rodriguez is ready. In my eyes, he seems like the next man up. He earned his playing time throughout the whole season, especially down the stretch, like you said, for Chuck Hicks, and just in general. Made a lot of really good plays. It doesn't seem very mistake prone for a true freshman. I think it's very impressive, and wouldn't be surprised if he's a starter next year or definitely years and beyond. But I think it's really going to depend on if they think he's ready. I feel like we're kind of saying the same thing over and over again. A lot of young promise and potential and talent at the spot. I think Jeremiah Beasley would be a very intriguing player if he can make a jump. He'd be a redshirt sophomore, I believe, or just I believe redshirt sophomore. So or freshman, I don't know, but there's going to be some promise there. And then McClellan and King, two just very solid. Like I said, not very mistake prone linebackers. That if a guy like Rodriguez, who wasn't the highest ranked recruit, in the country, but he clearly earned his playing time. So if he can earn his playing time, wouldn't be surprised if a guy like King or McClellan could do the same. But at the very least, might make sense to bring in one experienced, Power 5 veteran. I know, just following some stuff, that there's been a lot of really just like tackle machine FCS middle linebackers. I don't remember the names, but there was, the one guy from Grambling State and one from Northwestern State that like led the FCS and tackles. So there's going to be names out there. And I think I mentioned this last episode that we probably don't even know who the best bunch of portal talent is yet. I mean, it's going to keep coming and coming and coming, especially here soon when it actually opens up. It might have opened up today, or maybe it's Monday. I'm not quite sure, but we don't even know who's going to be in the portal yet. So definitely going to be a thing where you have to, maybe wait and see who's there, or maybe they already know who's going to be there and they have their eyes on somebody, but probably wouldn't, couldn't hurt to take someone else on and add a veteran. But I think the preparation and is Nicholas Rodriguez ready, I think, is going to be the big question.
Yeah, exactly. And Corey Flagg was one of their earliest additions to the portal last season, and I still think probably their best transfer portal addition to the season. Just a rare player with his versatility along the defense. So a lot to replace there, almost losing 2.5 players with Corey Flagg. On to cornerback, another kind of a group similar to linebacker, where you have some promising young talent, but do you really want to hang your hat on them and rely on them without a veteran presence in there? Losing Marcus Clark, who was their fourth option this season, but retaining Nicholas Deloach, who got quite a bit of playing time, was switching off with Toriano Pride quite often this season. Retaining Cameron Keys in his sophomore season. Well, obviously, we should say that all of these are barring any transfer portal departures. We don't know of any Mizzou defense players to announce that yet. And then Drayden Norwood, Toriano Pride Jr., Jamar McNeil, Jaron Sinsball, and Jamarian Wayne, the former wide receiver, and adding Mark Manfred in this freshman class. Really big to keep Norwood with all the kind of veteran leadership and presence they're losing on this defense. Great to keep Norwood there. He was their kind of one steady rock at cornerback back this season. Toriano Pride, I guess you could say was a little bit of a disappointment coming in from Clemson. Was a 5-star prospect out of high school, but at the end of the day, I think it was just, it is who he is. And maybe that 5-star rating got people a little excited for him, though. So, I mean, if Nicholas Deloach continues to develop like the way he was on the trajectory he was this year, then, probably takes over a considerable amount for Toriano like it did near the end of this season. Cam Keys is exciting, but I mean, I don't think you're, losing Marcus Clark isn't breaking your back of the secondary. Could use another addition depending on where they really see Toriano Pride is at. But if they, again, it's fun to do this, like breaking down, but at the end of the day, like without a salary cap, like eventually there's only so much you can spend. And Drinkwood talked about this too after signing that class, of having to find the right size for the freshman class they're bringing in, because you got to shell out money to them, and then you got to shell out money to this transfer portal class, and that the amount of players they brought in the freshman class and where they brought those freshman players in is directly related to what their plans are in the transfer portal. And obviously we're really just starting to think about this now, but they've had this plan for quite a bit. So I would say that, again, depending on where they feel Toriano and Nick Deloach are at, really is going to depend a lot on this. But again, maybe a veteran addition, depending on where their other moves shake up. What are you thinking, Michael?
Yeah, I completely agree. It really depends on how they, assess and evaluate what they have with Toriano Pride and Nick Deloach. But it's another one of those things. Again, it seems like we're kind of repeating ourselves, that they've, had flashes and had really good moments, but they notably had some bad moments, probably more than, that pair more than others. I feel like I can call back on Pride having a couple broken coverages, and especially in the A&M and Alabama game, when just it was points on points on points on the board. Those issues are really amplified. So they're young too. It makes you wonder if the expectations for Toriano Pride are maybe a little bit too high, because he's this 4 or 5-star high school talent, and he's from a notable program in Clemson, but he hadn't seen the field all that much. So and you can I'm not making the argument that Missouri is a step up or step down from Clemson, but he played more at an SEC school, and he was at an ACC school before. So he had the experience around him, and, going against talented teams and that sort of thing. Maybe he just wasn't fully ready, or is still learning. I mean, he's going to have more years of college, and now he has a year of SEC football under his belt. So I would anticipate a leap from both of them. And again, Deloach is also not very experienced. So there are disappointing moments for both of them, yes, but they're very young and now have a year of experience under their belt. So maybe that's something worth considering. But yeah, it depends on how they're evaluated and their performance, and if they think they need to go add another veteran. You made a good point. There are more pressing needs, more on the offensive side of the ball, really. There aren't, besides safety, which we're going to get to here in a second, really isn't that much that they need on defense. So adding another corner or adding a middle linebacker or, maybe more experience on the defensive line would be luxuries, honestly. It seems like they don't really need any of those positions, that they have guys who they know can play. Now, internal evaluations at all is something we're not going to really hear about, and we'll only know if what they think of these guys by if they make these additions or not. So something to consider there. I mean, you could add another corner, but Pride and Deloach were inexperienced and young and still learning this year, and now have that year of experience under their belt. So I'd like to think they can show some growth there. So you could go add another one, but you made the point that there might be money better spent elsewhere.
Right, and defense backs coach Hal Pogue, I think, has proven that he deserves the benefit of the doubt. Sometimes I would say, Drayden Norwood, for example, goes into this season. We knew in the spring was going to be that starting corner alongside Toriano Pride was the expectation, and Norwood at that point didn't have a lot of playing time under his belt. Was the third option behind Chris Havenstrain and Ennis Rakestraw last season, and then he goes out there and it's just like I said, a really steady, reliable corner for Missouri. So they have some guys that maybe haven't seen the field too much. That could be developed and step into much larger roles this year. And yeah, as you mentioned with Deloach and Toriano kind of fit into that bucket as well there. So Toriano didn't have much playing experience, and then Deloach either. So they'll learn and have an offseason to grow now. Moving on to safety, feels like kind of what you hinted at could be the biggest need on this team. But again, depends on how they evaluate some of these younger guys that we haven't really seen the field yet. So Sidney Williams, he walked on senior day. He has the extra year of eligibility, so we'll see if he utilizes that. Losing Trevez Johnson, though, and Joseph Charleston, both of those, I mean, I've seen some people start to give love to Joseph Charleston on Twitter for this, but the play he made against Arkansas to break up that touchdown, just incredible. Broke both of his hands at some point this season, playing with two clubs. So incredible play by him, leaves Mizzou, his mark on Mizzou. Retaining, though, Marvin Burks Jr., Dalen Cannell, again, has another year of eligibility, but his dad at least is trying to campaign for Dalen to get an invite to the Senior Bowl. So we'll see where that ends up going. And then you have Caleb Flagg, Trajan Greco, Jackson Hancock, and then you're adding from East St. Louis, Charles Bass, corner / safety. Mizzou had him listed as a safety when they announced their signing class. Marvin Burks, obviously, I think you got to feel confident in with the experience he got this season and last year too as a freshman. And then Greco, again, is the one that has me a little bit turned on, how do they really feel about, can he go in there? Can you rely on him as a starter in year two? And he obviously played quite a bit in his freshman season, more than you'd expected of a freshman. He did some solid work on special teams, got some plays from scrimmage as well. Do they feel enough to put that to ask him to do even more as a sophomore? If you lose Dalen Carnell and Trevez Johnson, that is a big loss at the star position. They would. I'm not sure who on the roster would really slot into there, but if they lose Dalen and Trevez, I think they add a star at least in the portal, just with how important it is in Batoon's and was in Baker's scheme. And then for free strong safety Rover, Marvin Burks is going to be a guy there. Trajan Greco, even if they don't feel comfortable like fully starting him, work him into the rotation. They had a pretty good rotation going this season, and I think Greco could become a large part of that. But again, I probably add another guy in there, just a veteran, because if Dalen leaves, you have Marvin, who is going to be a junior. You have Greco, a sophomore, and then Jackson Hancock, who I don't think has seen the field. Caleb Flagg, who has experience from his time at Houston Christian, but not necessarily from scrimmage with Missouri. So Charles Bass was a big ad, though. But Michael, what do you think about the safety group? Kind of, like I said, biggest need, I would say.
Yeah, I really don't disagree with anything you said again. Caleb Flagg is honestly interesting to me. He saw some increased snaps towards the end of the season and was probably more playable than people really thought he would be. So there might be something positive there. I'm not saying as a starter, but at least you don't have to, go worry about adding depth guys. You probably have a depth guy at the very least in Caleb Flagg. It kind of feels like Trajan Greco was following a similar trajectory to what Marvin Burks did, right? Burks was a standout on special teams and made some plays on defense, at certain points of the season and earned a starting spot his next year. So again, it's just internal evaluation and or evaluation, excuse me, and where they think Greco is. Definitely would not hurt to go add again veteran, experienced starter. They're there. There's already good ones there. So give Greco another year, maybe, to grow behind someone with experience. Definitely couldn't hurt. Charles Bass, like you said, is a big addition, and that's also a guy who might be, worth giving him a consideration for, not saying to start it, but also, give him some depth snaps there. But yeah, a lot of questions. I don't really know where this one's going to go. Adding one in the transfer portal seems like a safe bet. A guy that could either lead the room or at least perform at a high level.
Moving on to special teams, interesting group here. They've had 5 different special teamers announce decisions to enter the portal over these past 6 days here, and like it makes sense that punter, kicker, and long snapper would be the most transferred out positions. Probably more than quarterback, honestly, because if you aren't starting for your team, then you're not getting playing time. There's no sort of rotation. But at long snapper, Jack Kotz announced that he'd be transferring. Trey Flint is graduating or out of eligibility.
Yes,
out of eligibility for Trey Flint. Losing punter Orion Phillips, who transferred in from Murray State this past season. And then at kicker, 3 announcing their transfer, and Nick Quadrini, Brady Brum, and Will Saffris, retaining Blake Craig there to be certain, and then adding Robert Meyer as a freshman, 5-star according to Cole's Kickers camps. At punter, they're possibly retaining Luke Bauer. Has been what has stuck on my mind for the past 2 days, honestly, of what their punter situation looks like. He does have another year of eligibility. He redshirted his first 2 seasons, but he did walk on senior day. So who knows what that looks like. But they have reached out to a few guys on the portal already. At least I believe a kicker from Charlotte, and then another punter too. So if they're losing Luke Bauer, obviously they have to add their, Brett LeBlanc they exclusively used on field goals and extra points this year. So I guess if they don't feel that Brett LeBlanc can do punts, then they have to add somebody there at long snapper as well. But they do have Henry Crosby coming in as a freshman there too. So yeah, with Blake Craig, I think having the competition with Robert Meyer is good, and I think you got to add someone else at kicker, just again for at the very least to compete with Blake Craig. Too many mistakes for him this season. I know he's young, but ultimately there's very little room for error in kickers in college football. And they were patient with Harrison Mevis at times. I would say though in his first year, 2022, when he was starting, was really solid. Or 2021 was his first year, rather. Really solid. 2022, kind of a down year. So patient with him at times, including in the 2023 season, and then he came through big for them. But with Blake Craig, again, too many mistakes to really have him as your only option without a little bit of pressure. Michael, what do you make of the special teams for NC out of here?
I honestly don't. I don't have that many thoughts. The Charlotte kicker looks efficient. and experienced. So that's a positive, I guess. And I was looking his name up. The punter that Missouri offered in the transfer portal, his name is Blake Dowd, maybe, from Colorado School of Mines, and he seems to have quite a nice leg. I don't know. So I mean, yeah, it makes sense that these guys would leave. If Luke Bauer is back, I mean, maybe you add another guy, but he's going to be the starter for unless something crazy happens. He had a pretty darn good year and he was reliable. Blake Craig, maybe not as much, but again, just a freshman, and you do need to find consistency. But you mentioned they're patient with Harrison Mevis, and I imagine they're going to be patient with him as well. And but bringing in competition for him, not a bad idea at all. And then long snappers are long snappers. I mean, Henry Crosby comes in. Yeah, LeBlanc hasn't been unreliable. So I would imagine that throwing him, on the punting side of things wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. But yeah.
You mentioned Colorado School of the Mines punter they're trying to get from there. That's the second time I've heard about Colorado School of the Mines this season. I can't remember who it was, but one of their non-conference opponents, quarterbacks, played there at one point. I can't remember who it is.
It was Murray State.
Oh, okay, yes, because
Jaden Johansson, yeah.
Because Drinkwitz was telling us that their whole entire roster was different, and they looked far and wide to find guys. So that's so maybe that's where Mizzou's new punter will come from. So exciting stuff to watch. Maybe not on special teams. Maybe that's not your thing. But exciting things to watch all across this team. A lot of interesting decisions to make in the transfer portal. And again, without knowing the real cost of these, I mean, we can speculate all day, and it's pretty obvious who's making millions and who's not. But without knowing the exact details on these numbers, it's really hard to put a realistic plan or where can they invest this money. So will be interesting to see over this next week. Transfer portal officially opens Monday. Only players from Mizzou to announce transfer portal departures, as we said, 5 special teamers, and then Mekhi Miller as well. So that's going to wrap up our football talk for today. We do need to talk about basketball, though. Mizzou basketball facing their biggest matchup of the regular season, what you would think. I mean, they play Auburn too. But the border war, the most emotions they're going to have all season long, at least for the fan base, facing number 1 Kansas, although that number 1 Kansas, I mean, it's going to be good for Mizzou because the next poll doesn't come out before they play them. So they are going to get to play number 1 Kansas, hosting them at Mizzou Arena this weekend. And to help us preview this match is our lead basketball reporter, Chase James. Chase, how are you doing? How are you feeling during Border War week?
I'm doing good. I hope my echo isn't terrible. Is it? Okay, because I'm in the library right now. But I'm very excited for Sunday. This is my first time actually covering a Kansas-Mizzou matchup. I saw it freshman year, the 30-point loss on the Kobe Brown team, but it's going to be cool to cover it. It's definitely a different feeling. I'm looking forward to see how they match up this year.
Now, Kansas is coming off their very first loss of the season to Creighton, and so we are lucky enough to have a Creighton expert here on the All Things Mizzou podcast, Michael from the Nebraska. What can you tell us about? I mean, I don't. To be honest with you, I don't really care about Creighton's basketball team, but can you tell us what Creighton did well against Kansas?
Yeah. So I guess the first main thing is Creighton has one of the best big men in the country in Ryan Kalkbrenner. Kansas has one of the best big men in the country in Hunter Dickinson. Those two basically canceled each other out, which that's a big chunk of Kansas's offense. And I believe he had 6 points and 8 rebounds or something to that effect. And Kalkbrenner limited him. Helped in the rebounding side of things on the offensive glass and defensive glass. So I guess in general, anything that Missouri can do to limit Hunter Dickinson is going to be very important. Also, Creighton just hit a lot of shots. They hit more shots than Kansas. Kind of the fundamental rule of basketball. Whoever makes more shots is going to win the game. And they hit some tough ones. And honestly, from the perimeter, didn't miss that much. So And obviously that's kind of Creighton's identity, as a team. And in the past years, it's kind of their motto. So makes sense that that's what they relied on. And, their losses earlier in the season are because they weren't shooting well from the perimeter. So they're a team that live and die by the three, and just Kansas couldn't cover it. And, they did a good job screening people open and getting shots. But at the end of the day, it was a lot of tough one-on-one shots and shot creation. That is what got things done for Creighton. Also, Kansas just couldn't, they couldn't make anything. They were missing shots around the rim. I believe DeJuan Harris, Kansas starting point guard, was like 6 for 20 or something like that. He just could not make anything, and they were forcing him to shoot, which has been kind of a argument or a question around DeJuan Harris's play for the last 3 or 4 seasons. He's a heck of a player and a great playmaker, great point guard, not a shooter, and he likes to take the shots sometimes. So something else to keep in mind there. But they did some good things defensively, just forcing Kansas to take tough shots and eventually forcing him to shoot threes that they just were not making. And Dickinson, I mean, he was trying to force the issue and score his own points, but Kalkbrenner is one of the best, shot blockers or shot alterers in the country, and wasn't, as plain and simple as shooting right over him.
DeJuan Harris, a Columbia native, Rockbridge alumni, and apparently whatever the opposite of the saying is of shoot or shoot, he shoots too. I mean, Hunter Dickinson, one of the best players in the country. Where and how do Peyton Marshall and Josh Gray match up with them? Two very different types of center. I mean, Josh Gray is more closer to a big man, traditional big man, than a lot of others are. But Peyton Marshall, obviously, just the big body in there. Like, Michael, how do they match up with a more modern of the Connor Vanover mold with Hunter Dickinson?
Well, I mean, it's just a physicality thing, and I don't think anyone's gonna, offensively, no one's gonna expect Josh Gray and Peyton Marshall to go score a whole bunch of points or grab a whole bunch of rebounds to really do anything, eye-catching on the stat sheet. It's a different situation for Kalkbrenner. That's an important part of their offense, so he has more to worry about. But I think when you're throwing Marshall and Gray out there, you just want to go body up Hunter Dickinson, be physical, maybe push him around a little bit. I feel like he's known for some emotional outbursts, and if that seems like something that could play into Missouri's advantage, especially in front of their home crowd. If he gets going, then it's going to make a lot of people happy or unhappy. I guess, up to their discretion. But I think just being physical, don't foul him. He's a pretty solid free throw shooter, and those are going to be easy ones for him. But try not to foul, but just being physical and making him take tough shots, because it's one of those things where once he gets the ball in the paint and he's, has his defender on his back, I would say 70-80% of the time he's going up with that shot. And I don't know what he's shooting from the field off the top of my head. I would imagine it's something pretty efficient because he does have a very good touch around the rim. He's averaging probably around 20 points a game. So, he's a good paint scorer, and that's the majority of his touches are going to be. But being physical and forcing, any sort of tough shot you can get out of them is going to be really important. And I would like to think Marshall and Gray are both pretty physical players. Especially Marshall. I mean, it's no secret that he's a pretty big guy, and he's crafty and creative, pretty good defensive end as well. So throwing both of them at Hunter Dickinson to counteract anything and just play a physical game is going to be important.
Right. Peyton Marshall talked about after this game against California, where in high school he would get fouled for his size, really, just for playing physical. And he says can't get fouled anymore. Now he can just tell him to get in the weight room. So turning things inward for this Mizzou basketball team, getting that win over California, it felt like a big morale win to me, I think, to have kind of experience a similar collapse that they've had in the second half of games, except this time it just came in the final minutes of the first half, where California goes on a 17-0 scoring run. And I mean, honestly, it feels a little bit unfair to compare that to kind of some of the other times where Mizzou has collapsed, even against Memphis this year, because this time it just felt like a lot more of California doing their thing. But then they go out there, respond with the right energy in the second half. Really a true style of Missouri showing. You have so many guys contributing. I think a really good argument for Dennis Gates using really deep rotations. You saw Anthony Robinson, he recorded a double-double a week or so ago against, I forget who, but then this one probably being his best showing. He goes for 20 points in the second half to help Mizzou win this one. And first win over a Power 5 opponent or Power 4 opponent this season. And again, I mean, honestly, I kind of felt the same after they beat Pitt in the SEC ACC Challenge last year. And we all know how that season ended up going. But felt like a big win at home for this team heading into this game against Kansas. So, Chase, what are your thoughts of this Mizzou team after kind of seeing them against a better measuring stick in Cal?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the collapses this team has had over the last year or two, and that win is super big for going into this Kansas game. I mean, they took care of business in the non-conference. They won by like 30 points in most of those games, but that's not going to tell a lot when you're playing the number one team in the country. And Cal's not in particular like one of the best teams in the ACC, but it is a tougher opponent that them being able to fight back, call their way. I mean, Anthony Robinson scores 29 points. That's all encouraging for Cal. And I mean, overall, there's nothing you can really complain about with this team. They've handled business, I think. Gates has used almost everyone, I think about everyone on the roster. The freshmen have played. They look good. I mean, they're not playing heavy minutes, but there's definitely encouraging things there. And then Caleb Grill's been amazing. Obviously, he's hurt. He will not play. And Gates did say that there's no timeline there, so we don't know when exactly he'll be back. But Tamar Bates has still been consistent. And then, we're seeing the progression of Anthony Robinson at point guard. So I think we'll see how this game goes. It's going to be difficult, but I think there's a lot more encouraging signs this year than last year.
And Chase, you mentioned Caleb Grill's injury. Obviously, a scary situation, and glad to see that he's doing okay. He's wearing a neck brace in this game or on the bench during the Cal game. Like you said, no timeline for his return, but just the fact that he's doing okay from that. And Mizzou without Caleb Grill in this game against Cal, they only took 9 3-point shots. Just a very different offense we saw out there in the second half. I mean, how do you, without Caleb Grill, and that's obviously going to continue, like, how do you, what's the difference between a Mizzou offense without Caleb Grill? Obviously the straightforward thing is they're not taking as many 3-point shots, but how do they turn that more into focusing inside the paint? And, facilitator like Anthony Robinson helps a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, it is tough losing. I mean, he's been leading the team in scoring, and you're losing a lot of 3-point opportunities, which would be really beneficial against this team, especially one with Hunter Dickinson inside the paint. But I think it allows them to maybe work more on the pick and roll and get more looks inside the paint and maybe in the mid range. It's a little more unpredictable maybe because when Caleb Grill is playing, I mean, it's expected that most of his shots are going to be from behind the arc. So I think they have a little bit of a different look. After Grill went down, I mean, Gates said they're playing by committee. So it's a tough loss, but I think they have enough guys down the rotation to where it sucks, but they can do enough to not hurt so much without him.
Right, and I thought offensively they looked great in the half court against Cal, especially in the second half, which you're losing a lot of with Grill. So good to see that. And like you said, they have the guys to kind of replace different aspects of this game. He's the best 3-point shooter on the team. They have guys that can step up and replace that. He's a really solid defensive player, but again, they have guys that can step up and replace those efforts, even if they're not the same guys who are shooting the threes. So, like I said, by committee is the right word for it, for replacing all of the areas, and Caleb Grill helps this team. And you mentioned the pick and roll offense from Mizzou. Michael, we were talking about it beforehand with Kansas defense. What can you tell us about how they're defending that?
Well, I mean, the Hunter Dickinson's biggest weakness, in my opinion, as a player, is how he defends the pick and roll, and it's just a it's a speed thing and tends to go under the screens. It gets thrown and drop coverage. And we saw Ant Robinson do it, and we heard him talk about it against Cal's big man coming off that high ball screen at the top of the key, whether it was coming from Aiden Shaw, Peyton Marshall, Josh Gray, usually Gray and Marshall, where they can kind of clear the way, for Robinson to go operate and find his little teardrop or something around the rim or a mid-range, which is, really how he picked apart Cal's defense the entire night in that second half. So I think that you mentioned it, Chase, that should be the exact offensive game plan. Is let Ant Robinson get downhill and pick and roll situations, make, DeJuan Harris or Zeke Mayo or AJ Storr, whatever, or, it's David Coit, any of those guards that could be guarding him, make them go over that screen, make Ant Robinson make the decision where if he wants to, dish it out, do something from the perimeter, or do what he's best at and get to the rim or the mid-range area. But yeah, Dickinson's, weakness is, getting in that drop coverage, and he gets too far away, and there's just a lot of open space in the center of the court. And he's a great shot blocker, and he's a big guy too. He's 7'1", so he's going to have a size advantage over anyone around the rim for the most part. So you have to, proceed with some caution and trying to score around him, and that's why those high ball screen situations are going to be more than ideal for Missouri's offense, especially with Caleb Grill out. He's not only the best shooter and most efficient shooter, but he's also the most willing three-point shooter on this team, outside of maybe Tamar Bates. And not having a guy like that who is confident in his shot, even when they don't go in, is a big, like we said, it's a big loss. Also think that three-point shot's going to be important, so they might be searching for that, somewhere else. And then one more thing I was thinking about, just wanted to add, against Creighton, Kansas played a little bit slower and liked to set up in the half court a lot. I think the pace at which Ant Robinson leads this offense and runs in transition, and the offensive pace of play in general from Missouri is going to be a very interesting factor to watch. If they can get out and run the fast break and force turnovers, might be an interesting game at Mizzou Arena.
Right, exactly. That's the whole identity of the 2022 team that went to the tournament. And obviously having Kobe Brown helps with that, but it was missing all of last year. And I think Mizzou last year was better than an 0-18 SEC team, but it was probably the biggest difference between 2022 and 2023. One, the loss of Kobe Brown, but then also just how he was able to conduct that really fast offense. In the first 10 minutes of the game, it would just run you down the court. And that was absent last year. And it seems like you said, Anthony Robinson is a big part of it. Some of the transfers they added too are starting to get that back. And I think what you mentioned about Caleb Grill being the most willing three-point shooter is a good point. Dennis Cates, after Marquise Warwick had a big game earlier this season, pulled out one line that he used with Noah Carter and Nick Honor off last season, that he wanted to see them shoot more. And so, the room for error against Kansas is very little. But I wouldn't be surprised if one of the messages Gates is sending to guys like Warwick, for example, are to be confident with those shots and shoot more. So yeah, it will be interesting, this matchup, at the very least, to see Mizzou up against a better measuring stick. Last year they only lost by 9. Kansas outplayed them for all 40 minutes, but they only lost by 9. Kind of too late of a comeback effort late in that one. So interested to see how this team stacks up against them. And with that, just win or loss in this one, guys. What is one thing that you're hoping to see from this Mizzou team? Michael, I'll start with you on that one.
Just some fight and some resiliency. And I think we saw that against Cal, and I was thoroughly impressed. I did not expect Missouri to come out swinging like they did in the first 2 minutes of the second half. It was really impressive, and they're probably going to go down the first half, right? It's a perfect first half that Missouri plays. They're probably going to go down at some point, and I don't think Missouri fans want to blow out. I don't think it's going to be maybe an ego check if Kansas rolls in and wins this game by 20 or 30 points. So if they go down early or go down the first half, just show some resiliency and fight and something to build from. this is I don't want to say vulnerable Kansas team, but they're beatable. I'd like to think unbiased that Creighton is a good basketball team. They just struggled at the beginning of the season, and this Kansas team can lose. And I think Creighton created a bit of a blueprint for how to do that. Not necessarily with 3-point shooting and that sort of thing, but just how they get people open and how fast they play and that sort of thing. So this Kansas team's beatable, and if Missouri can at least show some resiliency when they go down, or maybe they go up and show the fight to hold on to that lead, that would really be what I'm looking for.
Yeah, this is a little contradictory to what you just said, but Gates' biggest thing he's talked about this season that he wants out of this team is to play two halves like equally. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. I know it's tough against number one Kansas, but if they can come out with intensity and like not go down 10 to 20 in the first half and keep it together in the second half, even if they lose, that's encouraging that they competed the entire game with this team. And that's what you want to carry over. You don't want them to get in these holes in the first half and trying to make claw back in the second half. They did that against Cal, but you can't count on that every game. So I just wanted to see them play a complete game, and obviously not another blowout loss at home.
Right, and I think the fact that this is a home game is a big factor to watch in this one. I mean, last year they held their water with Kansas for the first few minutes with that. I was just looking up, it was 10-6 at one point, and then you could so clearly see the moment where everything got to them. The moment got to them. The fact that they were playing a blue blood got to them, that they were, all of the feelings of the rivalry got to them, all of the crowd at Allen Fieldhouse got to them, and then after that, it was completely different game. So they have that advantage in this one. I think what I want to see is just maybe, the legitimacy of some of the promise that we've been seeing out of all of the young guys that we've been talking about. If Anthony Robinson can continue to, I mean, I don't expect him to look as great as he did against, Lindenwood or whoever. But if he can continue to show that same promise and, to not be just a non-con merchant, as Twitter fans would say. Same with Peyton Marshall's another one of those guys. Trying to think a few others, but to see the talent and promise that we've seen through the first few games of this team continue to carry over, even if they aren't able to get enough done, Dennis Gates would still say they're in the infant stages of building a program, and a lot of these guys are just in the very first stage of their development. And if they can continue to show, as they have early this season against Kansas, that they are taking the right steps, then I think that will be an encouraging sign with just a month out before they enter SEC play. And I believe one of their first opponents is Auburn. So that's tough challenge for them to open SEC play. But any other thoughts from you guys in the border war matchup here?
I mean, I think this is a winnable basketball game, and I'm not saying I expect a victory from Missouri, but I don't know how Kansas is going to come out. They're facing two tough road environments in a row, but they also just got their butts handed to them, and they're probably looking to bounce back against one of their biggest rivals. So I'll be interested to see what type of, what Kansas team we get. On Sunday. But yeah, I think this is a very winnable game. That being said, and you've mentioned it, Joey, not a lot of room for error. I'm not going to say they're going to have to play a perfect game, but it's going to have to be darn close to perfect.
Yeah, Joey and I were talking about this last night. Like, it is a little unfortunate that they got that loss to Creighton in a way, because I think a lot of those really good teams, are they going to lose 2 in a row? I mean, it's possible, but it's definitely a little tough to imagine that. But I mean, this team has a good shot. I think, as we said, Kansas is beatable. So as long as it's competitive, I think we're going to have a pretty good game at Mizzou Arena.
Exactly. And obviously this team wants to win every game, But I think if they can have a really contested match with Kansas, I feel like they got to be feeling good about themselves. Next biggest matchup on the schedule is, they have a few mid-major non-cons in between now and then, but then they face Illinois on December 22nd for second rivalry matchup of the season before starting SEC play in early January. So as it has been for the past 3 seasons, always kind of a good measuring stick for where this Mizzou team is at. So will be an interesting one. Obviously, if they are able to pull off this upset win, then a lot on the season turns on its head, and we're having a lot different conversation about this team. So that's going to wrap it up for us today on the All Things Mizzou podcast. We appreciate you tuning into this episode, and we hope you tune in to the rest of our coverage here.